America, the Golden Land. The dream of immigrants from 5 continents for over 2 centuries. America, a land of power and beauty and wealth. A country enjoying the highest standard of living of any nation in the entire history of the earth. America, a land of unparalleled freedom. A nation conceived in liberty. America, a nation that was born in conflict and that has held in balance every internal force. A proud country that has never known defeat. America today is involved in another desperate conflict. Much of the action takes place behind the scenes, set in clinics, homes, and hospitals. Many Americans aren't even aware of this struggle. So brace yourself, because before this film is over, you will visit the bloody fields of battle. You'll meet the people involved in the fighting on both sides, which include some of the most influential figures in America today. And perhaps for the first time, you'll understand the reasons behind their struggle. Our story concerns abortion and began, strangely enough, in this relatively peaceful suburb of Los Angeles. Melvin Weisberg, a pathologist, owned a large storage container which he kept in his backyard. When he failed to make the final 2 payments, it was repossessed.
We made a decision to repossess it because his check did not clear the bank. And so we sent the truck out to pick up the container.
I rolled out there and took the box up and started pulling it up. And it was so heavy, it broke the winch.
And we couldn't get it off the trailer, so we had to leave it on the trailer because it was too heavy. So I was asked by Nick to have a crew go down and unload the container at the other yard.
I got a radio call that from Ron Gillette, the foreman, and he said the men were throwing up and there was something really wrong.
One of them fell down and hit me right in front of my feet. And it was opened up, and there it was. It was a mutilated body. And the more closer I looked at it, it was a human body.
And when I came to work the following day, I saw it myself. I couldn't believe it. And just little bitty babies, just all torn pieces. The heads chopped off, arms, legs, it just makes you sick to see something like that. Well, really, it's just, it makes you want to cry when you see something like that.
Starting at the very front of this container, it was just wall clear to the ceiling and clear to the sides, filled with them.
I really don't want to witness it again. Not what I saw.
Well, as the supervisor for the County of Los Angeles, we found out through the media that 17,000 infants had been stored in a container. So we asked for an investigation by the district attorney and the coroner's office. We found approximately 190 were over 20 weeks of age. I think some as old as 25, 27 weeks.
Mr. Antonovich contacted Mr. Gutierrez.
Glenn Wong is a funeral director for a major Los Angeles mortuary.
Ask us to go ahead and handle the burial of the fetuses. How I came involved was they were asking if it were possible to have anyone photograph these fetuses, and I so happened to be also a photographer.
How many fetuses were actually involved in the autopsies?
There were approximately about 44, if I'm correct.
And why were the autopsies performed?
They were to find out why, or what was the reason of the cause of death.
That wasn't apparent?
Apparently not. No, I've seen some of these fetuses, and believe me, they were apart. There were some where the eyes were bulging, and some where the chest cavity was ripped open. I do remember one where I saw a hand and a feet all apart. So it was kind of like the hands were intact, The feet were intact, and everything else was more like just a little potpourri, a little of everything, and that was it. That kind of turned me.
Here we see the abortionist stretching the cervix very wide open.
Dr. John Wilkie, who with his wife Barbara authored The Handbook on Abortion, described the dilation and extraction method used to abort many of the fetuses.
That without any anesthetic, the abortionist reaches up into the womb and seizes part of the body of the baby, usually a leg or an arm, twisting and tearing, tears it off and away from the body of the baby. The baby, feeling pain, does not have any anesthetic. Bleeding is extreme. The abortionist returns in there with this grasping pliers-like instrument, tearing more parts of the body away, snapping the spine, and finally the mechanical problem is to get the skull out, and so he usually has to crush the skull in order to bring it out.
We had a court order that would allow us to bury these infants, being a humane act. And the ACLU comes in again saying that this is just tissue. We want to incinerate them, and there's no need for a burial. Because if you had a burial, somehow that's going to create a problem. Problem for whom?
And at that time, I think everybody there realized this was wrong, that it was really wrong. Everybody standing there felt that way. Even the coroner's office, I could sense that they were treating this like they were dead people, and they are dead people. That's the way everybody treated it. Evidently, the ACLU doesn't feel that way. And then transferred it all into to the original container, and as I understand, it's still up in a county yard someplace.
Is it refrigerated?
No, it's in a steel container.
And how long, do you have any idea how long it'll be there?
I don't know, but it's been 2 years now, so who knows?
Although the discovery of 17,000 fetuses in a trash container is not an everyday occurrence, it is an event that should surprise no one. For every 3 days, an equivalent number of fetal children are disposed of in this country. 17,000. The story behind these amazing statistics really begins in 1973, when the Supreme Court handed down its momentous Roe versus Wade decision. It took Justice Harry Blackmun a full year to write his majority opinion. The result of that decision was to legalize abortion instantaneously.
This one, indeed I tried in I think the second paragraph of that opinion to indicate the basic controversial and emotional aspect of the issue. I pulled no punches in that respect.
Roe versus Wade breaks the 9 months before birth into 3 intervals. Up to 3 months in the womb, a woman can abort the growing child without restriction. From 3 months to 6 months, the states may make laws on where and how abortions can be done, but cannot prohibit abortions. After 6 months, the states can stop abortions, but not if the mother's physical or mental health might be endangered. These vague conditions amount to authorizing abortion up to the day of birth.
And I think you can think of any name to call someone, and I've been called it, butcher of Dachau, murderer, Pontius Pilate, King Herod, you name it, it's all in there. Some of it is very intemperate. On the other hand, some of the letters that I received are without any question, some of the most wonderful letters that one could imagine. The 9 justices are necessarily, I think, by the time they arrive here, persons of fairly strong convictions. And they're not going to be pushed around. They've had experience in the law, and each of them feels that his attitude probably is the correct one. But
only yours really is, right?
Well, I've learned the hard way that I'm often wrong.
Among those who feel that Justice Blackmun was wrong concerning Roe versus Wade are 2 constitutional authorities, Michael Ferris, Senior Counsel for Concerned Women for America, and Robert Byrne, Professor of Law at Fordham University in New York. In writing the majority opinion, Justice Blackmun said there was no consensus.
in medicine or science or religion to say when a human life begins?
Well, there certainly has been a consensus throughout our law. The common law, from its very beginnings, from Bracton in the 12th century, the whole thrust of the common law is to find out when does a human life begin in the womb. And from then on, we're going to protect it.
There is no written part of the Constitution which enumerates a right to privacy. The courts, the Supreme Court said that it came from the emanations of the penumbra of the Bill of Rights. Now, it takes a combination of being able to know what tea leaf reading is and some astronomy to explain that, because a penumbra is a partial shadow cast by the moon in an eclipse.
And of course, you know, even before Roe against Wade, we had certain justices of the Supreme Court in an earlier environmental decision indicating that meadows should be persons, so the meadow would have a right to exist. Justice Blackmun quotes John Donne and says, every man's death diminishes me because I'm involved with mankind. Well, for goodness sake, what about the death of babies? He said that in connection with the death of a meadow.
But since Roe versus Wade, there really hasn't been the need for that kind of justification of the procedure.
Dr. Bernard Towers is a professor of anatomy, psychiatry, and pediatrics at UCLA, and an advocate of abortion rights. I spoke to him and to Dr. Bernard Nathanson, a New York obstetrician who was previously a leader in the abortion rights movement, on the scientific view of human life.
Was the Roe versus Wade the right decision?
Well, I wouldn't say it was the right decision. I would say that it was a decision made in a scientific vacuum and lacking any of the data we have today. It was probably at least a logical decision, but certainly a decision born strictly out of ignorance.
It doesn't seem to me that the medical profession was ever very strongly pro-abortion.
But I think the overriding issue here is economics, money. The abortion industry is about a $500 million a year industry.
I think we are a service industry.
One is always reluctant to try to assassinate Santa Claus.
Dr. Towers, when does human life begin?
Well, that's a very strange question. You see, it is quite clear that every cell in our bodies is alive. Well, not every cell. There are cells that are dying all the time, of course, but certainly the cells which provide the basis for the newly developing fertilized egg, those cells, the egg itself and the sperm, are living human cells.
The sperm has only 23 chromosomes, and the egg has only 23 chromosomes, whereas every human being, including the human being that is formed at conception, has 46 chromosomes. So in that sense, the sperm and the egg are not complete human beings.
When they unite together, the product of that union is itself a living cell. The whole question is whether, from a scientific, biological point of view, one can say that a cell is a human being or is a fellow citizen. I personally think it is inappropriate.
Life in the uterus before birth is a smooth continuum. And in that sense, one cannot designate at some point when life begins. There is no bar mitzvah in the uterus. It is merely life beginning when it really begins. Now, we've created it in the test tube. We've watched it start. We have seen the spark struck in vitro fertilization when the sperm meets the egg. So that the question of when life begins is no longer metaphysical, theological, legal, moral, religious. It is absolutely scientific now, and it has been established to begin at conception.
Talking with Gloria Allred, a prominent feminist attorney, and to the director of the ACLU's program on abortion, Janet Binshoff, it seemed the objections to the personhood of the fetus were more sociological than scientific.
The ACLU began a reproductive freedom project to specifically enforce the Roe versus Wade decision and see that women in all states across the country actually got the benefit of that very important decision. The goal and the reason for being of the American Civil Liberties Union is to advance and protect the constitutional rights of all Americans.
How does the ACLU look at the rights of the fetus or the unborn child?
Well, first of all, I agree with the Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade, which stated that the fetus is not a person under our American Constitution, so that the fetus does not have the protections of law that you and I have.
As to the abortion issue, the fetus is not considered a person under the Constitution of the United States, and therefore has no rights whatsoever, because only a person has rights under the United States Constitution, and that person is the mother.
If the fetus could be scientifically proven to be a person, a human being, would the ACLU step in to defend its rights?
Well, we know what the fetus is biologically and scientifically. I don't think anything has changed in the last 20 years. We know that the fetus is a potential human being. We know that the fetus is alive. We're not denigrating the status of the fetus, but you must remember that the fetus is part of a woman, and that the woman is the person who is directly affected by the pregnancy and by the childbearing. So there isn't going to be any scientific advance that's going to make the American Civil Liberties Union change their position at all. In fact, I think, you know, we become yearly very much more strongly committed to knowing that in order for women's equality to go forward, women must be able to control their own bodies.
I, for one, had an abortion when it was illegal and unsafe, and I almost died having that. And as a young woman, it was a very frightening, traumatic experience. And I always said that if one day I could do anything to make sure that in the future safe and legal abortions could be available to other young people if they needed them, that I would do my part. So that is why we will never give up that right to choose safe and legal abortions, no matter what the law does. And we will continue to fight for that right for our daughters.
Outspoken Congresswoman Bella Abzug commented on society's radically changed viewpoint on abortion, as did educator, philosopher, and attorney Dr. John Warwick Montgomery.
Most people don't realize that perhaps the greatest contribution that the women's movement has made to present civilization is a real recognition of the right of an individual, or the importance, or the potential, or the intrinsic value of an individual, aside from just the question of gender.
It's been said that in our country, in the 18th century, the Bible was killed. In the 19th century, God was killed. And therefore, in consequence, in the 20th century, man gets killed. You know, if you don't define the beginning of human life at the moment of conception, you will necessarily define it functionally at some other juncture. It'll be defined in terms of what the kid or the adult is able to do. It won't be in terms of what the person is, but what the person is able to produce. For example, once his brainwaves start operating, then he's a person. Or once his heart beats, he's a person. Or once he can accomplish this, that, or the other thing, he is a valuable member of society. The necessary consequence of this is that the minute that the society no longer values what you do or what I do, then that same society may very well want to get rid of us.
And since abortion, certainly in the first trimester, is considered a matter of choice to be made by an individual under a constitutional right of privacy, efforts on the part of those who disagree to impose their disagreement upon somebody else's exercise of a constitutional right is unacceptable.
One of the ways in which that activism is being shown is by the picketing of local abortion clinics nationwide. We visited this demonstration in Southern California, which was attended by over 200 pro-life protesters.
Why are you here today? Because we just want to make a stand that we don't think abortion is right, and we want people to know that.
We would like to have more of all the different denominations of Christians and non-Christians join in with us and say, we believe in life.
We're not going to be silent anymore. It's gone too long to sit back and watch these babies die.
And I'm here because I believe that the pastors especially should now take a stand, and I believe that we should leave our comfortable offices and homes and congregations that we've kept together and get back out in the street where the Lord wants us.
As the march continued, I became aware of a few protesters who felt so strongly about this issue that they intended to go inside the clinic, regardless of the consequences, and demand to see the doctors. Among them was a retired police chief from Santa Ana, California, Ed Allen.
You were a former police chief. Wouldn't this be breaking the law?
Not the moral law of God.
Yes, abortion, no. Life, yes, abortion.
What is your name, please?
Gloria Butler.
What are you going to do in there?
We're going to save babies' lives. That's what we're going in. We're going to speak to the doctor about abortion, let him know what he's doing.
What if they won't come out and speak to you?
Well, then we'll just wait until they do. Just be there.
What if they ask you to leave?
Well, we'll just stay. We're going to save babies' lives and talk to that doctor. That's what we're going to do.
You have business here?
Yes, we want to speak to the doctor.
I want to see the doctor.
If you don't have an appointment, you can be in.
Why? Is this a private place or is it a...
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact.
We'd like to speak
It's a private killing place.
You give that to the doctor. We're going to stay here. That's not going to solve the problem, you know.
Put your hand up there.
That's not going to solve the problem. I just want to tell you. Okay, let's sit here and wait for the doctor. You girls that are waiting for abortions, if any of you are.
Don't you have anything better?
Listen, there's a place where you can get help. 835 Life.
Excuse me, what's happening?
What's happening? We're trying to save babies and we're getting arrested for it. We're trying to talk to the doctor and they won't let us talk to you.
The doctor wouldn't talk to you?
No, they won't talk to us.
Down with abortion! Down with abortion! Down with sacrifice for Jesus!
You people are on private property. The people that have the private property want you off the private property now.
I know, this
So would
is
you
a death
please
house.
leave?
Killing
Okay, you may go back on the sidewalk.
Abortion is murder! 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 Abortion is murder!
Having heard the arguments on both sides of the issue, we traveled to Washington to meet the leaders of action organizations. I first talked with Jean Doyle of the National Right to Life Committee, and then with Nanette Falkenberg of the National Abortion Rights Action League, known as NARAL.
Mrs. Doyle, how did the National Right to Life Committee begin?
It began actually in 1973 as a formal organization. And it began because there was a real need for a clearinghouse or a focal point for the right to life people who had already been busy back in their states. There were euthanasia bills, experimentation bills, abortion bills in various states. And we were trying to hold back the tide.
NARAL was founded in 1969, before the Supreme Court had made abortion legal in this country. And the main purpose of it, when it was founded, was to help legalize abortion on a state-by-state basis.
But in 1973, with the advent of the Supreme Court abortion decision, it was necessary for us to become a cohesive group.
Subsequent to that, as the so-called pro-life movement became more and more political, and the pro-choice movement was perceived as being very weak, the focus of the organization changed in about 1979 and 1980 to become very much a politically focused organization.
Well, what is your greatest threat from the pro-life movement now?
I think I would say number one is the changing of the court, because if the makeup of the Supreme Court were to change, which it will because a lot of the justices are getting on in years, that the decision could potentially be overturned.
And then finally, I think the final arena, the battle will be won in the legislative arena. There's no question about that. But I think without the other two building blocks, without educating ourselves and others as to what the issue is all about and how high the stakes are, if we do not do that first, we'll motivate no one. We'll motivate no one in the citizenry, we'll motivate no one in the legislature, and we'll never get to that final arena victory, the legislation itself.
One of our major goals is to get the issue much more out of the political realm and to try and convince politicians that they really don't need to worry about the issue.
Now, you know, it's a real grassroots organization. every one of us are out there with our slide projectors and our films, and we're taking the program, the educational program about how life began, what happens when life is arbitrarily taken before birth, and people generally react very positively if you bring them the facts, if you stick to the scientific facts, the biological facts, and you present this in a very rational manner. People are going to opt for the right procedure. They're going to opt for the alternative to abortion rather than abortion itself, and we see it time and again.
Another major voice for the right to life is the American Life Lobby. I spoke with its founders, Paul and Judy Brown.
American Life Lobby, thanks to the generosity of our donors, is able to travel all over the country holding life awareness conferences in the communities where we need to be.
Now, when I think of American Life Lobby, I think of lobbying here in Washington, D.C. You also do that.
What we've learned is that politicians might admire the fact that we have a professional lobbyist on our staff, but that they really are not going to listen to him. They will listen to people from his district who contact him and say, I can vote you out of office and I want you to do this.
But, you know, there are many groups and a number of individuals who have made it a crusade or a campaign, as it were, to try to...
Faye Waddleton is president of Planned Parenthood International, the most powerful pro-abortion organization in the United States.
Well, in the area of education, do you treat abortion along with other means of birth control?
Well, abortion is not treated along with other means of birth control per se. We consider abortion as a means or one option available to a woman facing an unwanted pregnancy. If a young woman has become pregnant and has made the decision based on information and knowledge of the options available to her to have a pregnancy, she has demonstrated a measure of maturity that should not be ignored. We certainly encourage young people to discuss these matters with their parents, but they know better what the situation is and what their relationships are. And the greater good here is gained by giving the young woman the means to end an unwanted pregnancy than by upholding a standard of parental authority that really doesn't serve anyone any good.
Do you think that a woman should be advised of the progress of the fetus before an abortion?
There is a difference between informing people about their health care, the risk, the benefits, and quite another in telling them that you will be killing your baby, and that kind of information, which are purely judgmental.
You go back to 1963, I believe it was, and here's a Planned Parenthood pamphlet distinguishing contraception from abortion. And the Planned Parenthood pamphlet says that abortion kills the life of a child after it has begun. Now, there was a little bit of consensus there. That was the old consensus before we decided to devalue a particular class of human beings.
But many women simply don't want to know that information, and for the state to require that a message be given to her about that information is just totally inappropriate. We want to give people as much information as they desire to have.
You will find sex instruction programs that deal with abortion as a method of birth control over and over again. Simple little games where a group of children can sit around a table and play an actual game about their human sexuality. If a little girl, for example, draws a card from the deck and finds out she's pregnant, she's given 3 options. She can keep her baby, she can get an abortion, or she can give the baby up for an adoption. And lo and behold, if she chooses the abortion chip, which is blue in color, she's won the game. And yet they say they don't encourage abortion.
Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah co-sponsored a constitutional human life amendment that aroused tremendous interest in the pro-life world.
The amendment you authored, and how was it changed by the time it got to the Senate floor?
Well, all of us would like to pass an amendment that would allow abortion only to save the life of the mother and not for all of these other reasons. But we concluded that the only way we could get a debate on the floor of the Senate, the first in the history of the Congress on a constitutional amendment, was to bring a more moderate amendment to the floor, which basically said this, that we would give concurrent jurisdiction to both the House, Senate in the federal government, and the state legislatures throughout the country to resolve the issue of abortion.
So at least getting it to the floor of the Senate was a victory for you.
Oh, it was a terrific victory. We've never even been able to debate this issue on its merits except through ad hoc amendments brought up during various sessions of Congress. We held the most full-fledged hearings, the most extensive hearings in the history of the abortion issue. I think there were somewhere near 70 or 80 witnesses, the best in the world on both sides of the issue. And I think the pro-life witnesses really came off a lot better than the others, but we gave them their chance to talk. We just know that our position is better.
Jean Doyle responded to those pro-lifers who felt that Senator Hatch's amendment didn't go far enough in protecting the unborn.
Whatever their reasons for not being able to join in the support of the Hatch-Eagleton Amendment, as I say, in charity, we have got to, if we're real good pro-lifers, we have got to allow for this diversity of opinion.
When you get right down to the bottom line, we want to stop abortion. We're not ever all going to agree, any more than the women's groups always agree, any more than the members of a family always agree, because that's what we are. We're a larger family. There has to be room for disagreement or none of us will grow.
But the few who went against us, they were purists who believed that we should fight right for the most pure approach towards abortion. Hey, I believe in that too. I fought for that too.
I've been told so many times, Jesse, back off of this issue. It's killing you back home. The feminists don't like you and others don't like you because...
North Carolina Republican Jesse Helms has repeatedly sponsored pro-life legislation in the Senate.
My answer to that is, if I have to back off on this issue, I would prefer to go home because I'm not going to sell my soul to stay in the United States Senate.
But I was involved in the battle before that.
Staunchly advocating abortion rights is Republican Senator Robert Packwood of Oregon.
You know, who knows what the original reason is that causes you to do something. But for years and years and years, I have felt that a woman ought to have a right to make that choice, whether or not she wants an abortion, and I've been involved in that battle for almost 20 years now.
On what do you base this belief?
It's hard to tell. Intuition, growing up, influence of parents, who knows where it initially comes from. All I know is that you are never going to have equality in this country for women so long as you've got a law on the books that says women can have equality, but they can't have equality on this issue.
The Supreme Court decision legalized abortion. It's been over a decade now, and yet there's a tremendous amount of opposition. Are you surprised?
Yes and no. I'm not surprised at the intensity of the little knot of opposition, and it's not a majority. It isn't a great quantity of people. If you were to ask the average American, what are the top 20 issues you're concerned about in this country? I don't think abortion would show up on the top 20. But you do have a hard core of zealots parading around under the name of Right to Life or the Life Political Action Committee or something like that, that have never given up. Now, time is not on their side. They're going to lose. They know that. I think everybody else knows that. The Supreme Court decision is going to stand, I hope.
I just think that there ought to be an understanding of what an abortion is. And this is one thing on the Senate floor that frustrates me. You cannot get Senator Kennedy and the rest of them to discuss what an abortion is. And I think we could have a great deal of progress if we would just have an understanding on that question alone. It's not just the removal of scar tissue. It's not just a matter of surgery. It is the deliberate termination of innocent human life, and I'm just never going to be among those who condone that.
Any group that burns as hot as Right to Life does cannot burn very long. You can almost go on the theory that the hotter the flame, the shorter the life of the fire.
I think those of us in Congress have a duty to exercise our responsibility to rein in an unreasonable federal judiciary.
The Hyde Amendment is with us all the time, thank God, and it deals with the funding of abortion and has always met with great success.
But that means it must be offered and sometimes debated vigorously and adopted every year. We've done it again this year, but the Respect Human Life bill seeks to put it as a part of the permanent law rather than an annual appropriation.
I'm very upset.
Taking issue with Henry Hyde is Democratic Congressman Henry Waxman of California.
For poor women who are on Medicaid to get an abortion, it is a medical procedure, it is a legal procedure, and to say that we will pay for the health care needs of the poor in our society, but this one procedure we're going to single out and say that we will not provide, seems to me improper.
A group of us inside what we call the pro-life caucus, which was mainly in the House of Representatives, we got together and argued this out among ourselves.
Congressman Robert Dornan wound things up.
Women of good conscience on both sides. Those of us who decided that life was sacred said we must have a clear-cut, paramount human life amendment.
I don't think we should be involved at all. It's not a government issue.
That this is so basic to our existence as a decent people on the planet Earth that this struggle will never, ever, ever go away.
Political Action Committee is
the National Right to Life Political Action Committee helps to elect pro-life legislators, according to its president, Sandy Fulsher.
And they've become very much a part of the American political scene now because this happens to be a nation of joiners, and people who are concerned with an issue or a topic tend to join together so they can speak with one voice.
Are there polls or statistics to show what part a pro-life, pro-choice issue can play in winning or losing an election?
Absolutely. It can make all the difference in the world. It's very clear that the pro-life vote is more meaningful and more abundant than the pro-abortion vote and can, in fact, make the difference in an election.
Medical Dr. Carolyn Gerster of Phoenix, Arizona, commented on the parallels between abortion and slavery. That study, of course, began with the Supreme Court decision, the Dred Scott decision. Tell us about that.
There is a tremendous parallel with the decision itself. And I think this was brought home to me so much when my fourth boy, who was then 9, came home from Keeve Elementary School and was asked to write a paragraph on the Dred Scott decision. We looked at that in the encyclopedia and a variety of books, and I found an interesting statement by Chief Justice Taney, the majority decision. He was the Chief Justice. And I'll never forget, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he said in essence, look, we're not making slavery compulsory. Every American citizen has the right to choose whether or not to own a slave. But the abolitionist should not impose his morality on the slave owner. And I turned to my 9-year-old and I said, Mark, that sounds reasonable to me. Does that sound reasonable to you? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And with that infinite wisdom that God gives to 9-year-old boys, but somehow withholds from Supreme Court justices, my son said, because the slave is a human being.
I decided to talk with the head of Chicago's Pro-Life Action League, Joe Scheidler, who explained his unique approach to stopping abortions.
You were a journalist, professor of journalism at Notre Dame. You've had a successful advertising agency. Why would you give up all this to do this kind of work?
Because I think this country is in grave danger. Any country that destroys its posterity at the rate of 1 every 20 seconds, 4,500 murder of children every day, that country isn't going to survive.
Now, as we talk, I've been watching a few of your counselors in front of an abortion clinic across the street. They look like they're very low-key, no signs, no pickets.
That's right.
How does it work?
Well, that's very effective because now for a picket or a demonstration, we will have signs, but when we're counseling, it's better not to even be identified as pro-life. You simply walk up to the couple and you ask them if they're going for an abortion. They usually say yes. And then you say, do you know anything about this clinic? Well, we do. We know, for instance, that these clinics have a number of malpractice suits against them. We know that just the other day, the police went in there and pulled the doctor out because he was operating without a license or under some kind of a disguise as a doctor. We have had an investigative report in one of our local newspapers, a 20-part series on the chicanery that goes on in these clinics. They abort women who aren't pregnant. They rush to see who can do the most abortions before a certain deadline, and then there's a little reward for the winner. We know that they apply medication, and before it's taken effect, the anesthesia, for instance, they'll start the abortions. There's a doctor known as Dr. Payne who seems to like to hear the women scream. We know all these things, and we tell the women going in. We tell them that 1 out of 10 of the women having abortions here aren't even pregnant, and we offer them a free pregnancy test and counseling in our own facility just up the street. We've stopped as many as 17 women from having abortions at this clinic in one morning.
One of the big complaints of pro-choice is that the pro-life people just talk a woman into keeping the baby at any cost and then just drop her.
That's a fiction. They know better than that. They know that 4,500 pregnancy help organizations are maintained by pro-lifers in this country. We not only talk the woman out of the abortion into having her baby, but we will get her medical help. We will talk with her family, with her boyfriend. We will help her get a job. We'll find a place for her to stay. If she can't go home and stay with her folks, we have homes for her. We have a scrapbook back at my office full of pictures of these babies at their birth, at their baptism, at their first birthday party, and as they enter kindergarten. The men are pro-abortion. You find that in any survey, any poll, it's primarily the men who want abortion for the women because being pregnant is kind of a disease. It's like having a broken toy.
Well, how do you deal with what you call a macho man?
I stopped one not long ago at one of the clinics. He was angry. He was going to punch me out. And so I usually start calling him Dad. And I said, hey, Dad, come here. I want to show you a picture of my son. And I showed him Pete. Pete's a great kid. He'd do anything. He's an actor. And I said, now I want to show you your son. Here. This little dismembered baby. That's going to be your son. You'll never play ball with him. He'll never make you proud when he's up there playing a part in a play or something. Well, he was really upset. His biggest concern was the girlfriend. He didn't want her to see this because he certainly didn't want her to have any information at all about a baby. He wanted to get her scraped out. So he went in the clinic angry. And after a while, I had to leave. But he came out after about a half hour, and he said to the counselor who was there, tell that bearded guy we didn't have the abortion. He won. Now, I don't know what his reasoning was. Maybe the fact that we were so concerned about somebody he cared nothing about gave a value to that child.
The involvement of Surgeon General C. Everett Koop with the physically handicapped added a new dimension to the abortion picture.
With the work you've done with the handicapped, do you have trouble advising a pregnant woman that's going to deliver a handicapped child in some way to keep her baby?
Having spent 35 years of my life doing operations on newborn babies, perhaps more than anybody in this country ever did until the time I came into government, I know that these children grow up to be creative and innovative. They're loved and they're loving. I think the bottom line of this controversy is in the following story. I have never had a parent come to me and say, why did you try so hard to save the life of my child? Nor have I ever had a grown individual, and now they're 35, 37 years old, who came to me and said, why did you try so hard to save my life? My number one example of this is a young boy that I operated on with my colleagues 55 times. You might say, what a tremendous waste of time, effort, money, and emotions. He is now on his way to being a professional. He is the president of his class in high school, and just a fine young man. It's worth the effort.
Vicki, this is Lonnie.
Through all my investigation of the life issue, I had not yet confronted the one being that had the most at stake in this struggle, the unborn child. Through the technology of real-time ultrasound, this young woman will be able to see the first pictures of her baby.
How far along are you?
3.5 months.
Oh, are you excited?
Yes.
What do you want, a boy or a girl?
A girl.
Lift this up. Okay, Vicki, this is going to be a little cold. It's the scanning gel. This is the ultrasound scan head. It's the device that sends and receives the signals to produce the image. I don't know. See the little heart beating? Look. Listen here. Now we can see the whole baby. You can see the head and the body. Oops, it's jumping all around.
Looks like it has the hiccups.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? Look, it's waving at us. Oh, look at that. See the arm? There's the elbow right there on the forearm and the hand. Whoop. It's scratching its nose or something. You see the little heart beating? Whoops. To look quickly.
He looks pretty comfortable in there, Vicki.
Vicki, how do you feel after your ultrasound?
Happy and excited, knowing that my baby's alive and healthy, moving. It just made me excited.
Not all babies are as lucky as Vicki's. Dr. John Wilkie described fetal experimentation conducted on first trimester aborted children.
Second menstrual period, so your baby's about 6 weeks old. What the experimenter is doing here, and this baby obviously has been aborted and will die soon after this, he's sticking this tiny little child in the most sensitive area at that age, and that's right around the nose and mouth.
What about this baby?
This one is about 2 weeks or 3 weeks older than the other one, much more sensitive to pain now. You notice this little tiny one is going to complain much more. You see the body response is much more vigorous. That cord, incidentally, has been cut, as you can see.
And will they just keep poking it until it dies?
That's obviously what they did here, and this baby died very soon.
The specter of abortion looms ever larger in America. Recorded for the first time are these real-time ultrasound pictures of a suction abortion. Dr. Bernard Nathanson describes what the abortionist is doing.
This is an 11-week child. At the extreme right, proceeding up toward the top of the uterus, you can see the coils of the umbilical cord coming off the child's abdomen. And now, in this image, you can see the instrument being pushed in from the right of the screen, which is, with reasonable probability, a dilator. Once again, we have what appears to be an instrument poking the child's abdomen, and you can see the child recoiling again, moving slightly to the left as the instrument comes in. On the back wall of the uterus, you can see the shadow of the cannula, which is the suction apparatus being pushed in. But now a new assault is mounted. The cannula comes in and out again. The abortionist is moving it on the back wall of the uterus, attempting to suction the child out. The child keeps moving violently away from it. You can see a great deal of agitated movements. The child is obviously agitated and anxious to get away from the cannula and is moving in whatever direction is available in this rather restricted zone of the uterus and the amniotic fluid. So the child is in a sense anchored to the suction, and the suction is acting like a giant leech pulling the child back and forth as it attaches itself to the back skin of the child. The uterus overall is beginning to clamp down on this baby. You can now see the head, but the body is badly defined and is probably beginning to come apart. And now the abortionist is introducing a polyp forceps, which is a long metallic instrument with two blades, into the uterus in an attempt to grab the child's head between the blades of the forceps, crush it, and then remove it from the uterus. The child at this point is still alive. Even the abortionist who actually did the procedure, who was with me at the editing in order to explain exactly what was going on also, turned away from the screen on numerous occasions in dismay.
Vietnam War hero Senator Jeremiah Denton was deeply affected by the legalization of abortion.
4 of those years in solitary confinement. What kept you going during all that time?
Prayer, answers to prayer, my own prayers and the prayers of others. Later, the joy of the knowledge of release, the first time I saw the American flag flying on American soil, that was a feeling I could never describe nor ever forget. So then, upon seeing the newsstand literature and learning that abortion, which had been the most hideous word, if you weren't in the Navy, we use rather salty language, and one of the saltiest terms we felt we could use if a plan was bad that someone was offering to you, an operational order or something, you'd say, that's an abortion. And yet, to learn that it was legal was a shock.
And that was part of what motivated you to pursue public office?
Upon returning, politics was the last thing from my mind. The first thing in my mind was the country has changed. And if you think about it very long,
Life's number one. And life is what you kill. And the commandment says, thou shalt not kill. And our basic premise, the single sentence which establishes our set of perspectives respecting what government is, says inalienable rights among these: life, endowed by the Creator. No man can take it away. Inalienable means no way to rationalize it away, to change it, to legislate it away. And yet it has effectively been. Yes, it's, to me, not just a social issue. It's a survival issue.
What can a person on the local level do to get involved if they feel the same way you do? What can someone do if they share your views and want to get involved? What would you have an individual do?
First of all, I'd have them understand what politics is. And politics is so simple and it's scary.
And I would just encourage people to start calling. A 1-minute polite phone call every day saying, we urge you to become a co-sponsor of the Human Life Amendment. And when they've done that, then you stop calling them.
So every vote is important. And then you have to have the facts. You have to have a reasoned viewpoint. You have to think about this issue a lot so that you can't be conned by superficial medical or philosophical or political arguments.
How much difference can one person make?
Hitler was one person. Idi Amin was one person. Stalin was one person. One person can make all the difference in the world.
Dr. Olga Fairfax is a Maryland psychologist who takes time daily to protest at an abortion clinic near her home.
I'm only one voice, but I am one voice. And this voice will not be silenced until we get a Human Life Amendment passed to re-protect unborn babies' lives.
Well, the efforts against abortion in this country have been ineffective only for one reason, and that is because the evangelicals in this country, of whom there are supposedly 40 million, have done nothing about it.
Author, artist, and filmmaker Frankie Schaefer spoke out for pro-life activism.
Been willing to use the existing institutions to change things. They don't vote their consciences. You see them still voting for candidates who have pro-abortion views. They don't have a clear political agenda on the human life issue. They haven't used their freedoms of the rights of free speech and assembly. Where are all the evangelicals pouring into the street to picket things like abortion clinics?
If you knew that in your neighborhood, Jane, it was legal to kill 10-year-old children, or 50-year-old men, or 70-year-old widows, or nuns, or Catholics, or Jews, or blacks, you wouldn't drive past that place every day.
Crusade for Life founder Donald S. Smith told me about an action any pro-lifer can take.
I understand you have a different approach, a presidential proclamation of personhood. What is that?
Well, Jane, a presidential proclamation of personhood would establish that all human beings in the United States, irrespective of their age or condition of health or dependency, would be considered persons.
Can a presidential proclamation override a Supreme Court decision?
You know, in 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and at that time there was a Supreme Court decision, the Dred Scott decision of 1857, which stated that the black man was not fully a person. And yet Lincoln issued that proclamation and freed the slaves. You see, the slaves were chattel. They could be held as property. But once they were freed, they could no longer be held as property. And so in a way, it controverted that Supreme Court decision. We think a presidential proclamation of personhood can do the same thing for the unborn child. And Jane, I believe that if hundreds of thousands of letters were to go to the president, that we would see some action.
What has been your biggest frustration over the past decade?
I think the biggest frustration is the fact that it's been a past decade. I think that it has taken so long for people to realize what the problems are. And I'm afraid some of our people are setting into a comfortable acceptance of what the situation is today. And therefore, we're going to have to step up our activities. If we thought we were working hard for the past decade, I have a feeling I need to say to our fellow pro-lifers, you ain't seen nothing yet.
And ultimately, we're going to win on this issue. We've just got to win. There are just too many lives involved.
Abraham Lincoln quoted the Bible in saying, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." You've seen America divided, at war with itself. It's a war between right and expediency, between principle and power. Is an unborn being a new human life to be nurtured and protected and loved? Or is it a possession a simple product of conception that can be destroyed without conscience or concern. The fate of America lies in response to that question. A new generation of this nation hangs in the balance, as does the fate of the newborn, the elderly, and the ill, all those who lie in the shadowy boundary of life in our society. Lincoln also said this nation could not endure half slave and half free. Today, we ask if this nation can endure half for abortion and half against it. You've now seen the life issue in all its dimensions. What you decide and what you will do will answer that question. This is Jane Chastain at Twilight in America.
Social problems must be solved by humane social solutions, not surgical holocausts.
If, let's say, an encyclopedia salesman keeps pestering me at my home, violating my right to privacy by shoving leaflets in under my door, I don't have a right to blow his head off with a shotgun.
The second paragraph, that oath, which states, I will abstain from all that's harmful and injurious, I will give to no man a deadly poison, even though asked, nor will I suggest such a counsel. In like manner, I will not give a woman an instrument to produce an abortion. That has been dropped from the oath in every medical school, to my knowledge, in America today. And in place of those words, the words, I will abstain from all that is illegal, have been inserted.
And I think the beginnings of life are, in the minds of some people, questionablest of time, just as the endings of life are. I don't have those problems.
Now, the abortion clinics also, they provide some type of counseling. How does your counseling add anything to this?
I tell them the truth. But you stop believing that you love your neighbor as you love yourself, that your neighbor is created in the image and likeness of God, or things like that. You're not America anymore.
Now we can discern the chilling, silent scream on the face of this child who is now facing imminent extinction. My name is Bernard N. Nathanson. I'm a physician, a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist. And I think I've had a passing experience in matters of abortion. Now, when I was a medical student in 1949, we had no such science as fetology. We were taught that the unborn child, the fetus, was something in the uterus, but it was really an article of faith as to whether or not it was a human being and whether or not that human being had any unique personal qualities. But the whole story has changed since the 1970s. It was at that time that the science of fetology exploded in the medical community. It exploded by means of the introduction of great new technologies such as ultrasound imaging, electronic fetal heart monitoring, fetology, hysteroscopy, radioimmunochemistry, and a host of other dazzling technologies which today constitute, in fact, the corpus of the science of fetology. Real-time ultrasound, that is, imaging of the child in motion, has been available as a clinical tool since 1976. The room for the ultrasound examination consists of a conventional examining table, as well as the ultrasound imaging device itself, a bulky appearing machine here. Now the pregnant woman is positioned on the table for the examination. The abdomen is suitably draped. The head of the instrument is now placed over the uterus. This device in turn consists basically of a crystal which sends out pulsing high-frequency sound waves and a transducer which collects the echoes of these waves. The echoes are then collated by a computer, which in turn assembles them into a recognizable image of the living unborn child. And the child can be imaged by either a linear scan, which is useful for later pregnancies, or a sector scan, which is more accurate for delineating the child in an early pregnancy, such as this one. The image, reconstructed from the echo pattern, is capable of truly amazing resolution. And so discerning is this instrument that the tiny valves of the heart can be studied as they snap open and shut during the contractions of the heart. Mothers and fathers, for the first time, have been afforded a view of their unborn child by this spectacular technology. And those technologies, those apparatuses and machines which we now use every day, have convinced us that beyond question, the unborn child is simply another human being, another member of the human community, indistinguishable in every way from any of us. Now, for the first time, we have the technology to see abortion from the victim's vantage point. Ultrasound imaging has allowed us to see this. And so for the first time, we are going to watch a child being torn apart, dismembered, disarticulated, crushed, and destroyed by the unfeeling steel instruments of the abortionist. What we are looking at here is a depiction of the development of this child in its prenatal stage of life, from virtually the very beginnings to the end of that stage. We have here the child at 4 weeks, at 8 weeks, at 12 weeks, at 16 weeks, at 18 weeks, at 20 weeks, and at 28 weeks. As you can see, there is no revolutionary or dramatic change in the form or in the substance of this person throughout this developmental stage. Now, this little person at 12 weeks is a fully formed, absolutely identifiable human being. He has had brain waves for at least 6 weeks. His heart has been functioning for perhaps 8 weeks. And all the rest of his human functions are indistinguishable from any of ours. Now, this book is Williams Obstetrics, the 16th edition, written in 1980. It is a standard textbook used throughout every medical school in the United States. Preface of this book, published in 1980, cautions us as follows. Happily, we have entered an era in which the fetus can be rightfully considered and treated as our second patient. Who would have dreamed, even a few years ago, that we could serve the fetus as physician? Traditional medical ethics and precepts command us that we must not destroy our patients, that we are pledged to preserve their lives. Now let's see what abortion does to this, our second patient. We have then the 12-week unborn child in the uterus being this muscle surrounding the child. When the abortionist commences the procedure, he will first place this instrument, which is known as a speculum, into the woman's vagina and will then open it in order to visualize the cervix, the neck of the womb here. Having visualized the cervix, the abortionist then takes this instrument, which is known as a tenaculum, and fastens it securely through the speculum onto the cervix in this manner, clamping shut the tenaculum and getting a firm grasp on the cervix. The next instrument which is brought into play is called the sound. This instrument is then introduced into the uterus, and it is then removed, the abortionist having ascertained exactly how deep and in fact how large the uterus is. And then this set of dilators, these metallic curved instruments, are used to effect the opening of the cervix in order to introduce finally the abortion instruments themselves. The abortionist first introduces the most slender of these instruments into the cervix to dilate the cervix, turns the instrument around to a slightly larger end, introduces that end, and then works his way through the various graduated, increasingly larger ends of this dilating instrument. He will then take the instrument known as the suction apparatus, which is opened. It is in a sterile container prior to the actual use of the instrument. And then this will be inserted through the dilated cervix up into the uterus and will then puncture the sac surrounding the child, allowing the amniotic fluid to escape. The instrument then will come into direct contact with the child, and with a pressure of approximately 55 or so millimeters of mercury applied to the end of this instrument as it is attached to a long, thick suction tubing at this end and to the abortion instrumentation, that is the machine at the other end. The suction tip will begin to tear the child apart. The pieces of the body are torn away one by one until finally all that remains are shards of the body and the head itself. The head will be too large to come through this instrument itself. This will necessitate the introduction of this instrument, called a polyp forceps, into the uterus through the already dilated cervix, and the abortionist will then attempt to grasp the free-floating head of the child in the uterus between the rings of this instrument. The head is then crushed, the contents of the head removed, and finally the bones of the head. And the abortion is then effectively at an end. We've seen what the 12-week child appears on the ultrasound screen. And we have also seen the mechanics, the actual steps of a 12-week abortion. Now, for the first time, we're going to see a film made with real-time ultrasound imaging of a 12-week abortion. Bear in mind that this is not an unusual instance, a late abortion. This is one of the 4,000 or so a day done every day in the United States. This film was made at an abortion clinic. The physician who performed the abortion was a young man who was working in 2 different abortion clinics at the time. He had already done close to 10,000 abortions in his young life. When he was asked to attend the editing session to view the film, he was so appalled at what he had done that he left the room momentarily, came back to finish the editing, but never again did another abortion. The young woman who used the real-time ultrasound camera was a feminist and a strong pro-abortionist. But she, too, was so moved by what she saw at the editing session that she never again discussed the subject of abortion. Now, let's turn to the actual film itself. We are now looking at a sector scan of a real-time ultrasound imaging of a 12-week unborn child. The child is orientated in this direction. You are looking now at the head of the child here, the body of the child here, and this image is the child's hand approaching its mouth. Looking a little more closely at the child, we can discern the eye, or the orbit of the eye, here, the nose of the child here, the mouth of the child here, and we can even look at the ventricle of the brain here. This is a fluid-filled space in the brain. We see the body of the child here with the ribs in silhouette and the spine of the child at the back. This rather granular area of tissue at the top of the sector appears to be the placenta, or afterbirth, of the child. And we can begin to see down here the thighs, the lower extremities of the child coming off the body in this manner. Now, let's move to the action. We now see the heart beating here in the child's chest. The heart is beating at a rate of approximately 140 a minute, and we can see the child moving rather serenely in the uterus. One can see it shifting position from time to time. It is still orientated in this manner, and the mouth is receiving the thumb of the child. The child again is moving quietly in its sanctuary. Now, this shadow which we are seeing down at the bottom of the screen is the suction tip. We have colored the suction tip deliberately in order for you to discern it more clearly. But the abortionist has now dilated the cervix and is now inserting this suction tip, which you can see moving back and forth across the screen. You will note that as the suction tip, which is now over here, moves toward the child will rear away from it and undergo much more violent, much more agitated movements. The child is now moving in a much more purposeful manner. Its orientation changes from time to time. It is rearing again here. Now, the suction tip has not actually touched the child, even though the child is extremely agitated and moving in a violent manner. The child has now moved back to the profile view, and the suction tip is flashing once again across the screen. The child's mouth is now open, and we will see that again on a freeze frame in a moment. But this suction tip, which you can see moving violently back and forth on the bottom of the screen, is the lethal instrument which will ultimately tear apart and destroy the child. It is only after the fluid has been broken, the sac has been disrupted, that the tip will actually come against the child. But we can see the tip moving back and forth as the abortionist seeks the child's body. Once again, we see the child's mouth wide open in a silent scream in this particular freeze frame. This is the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. Now, the heart rate has speeded up dramatically, and the child's movements are violent at this point. It does sense aggression in its sanctuary. It is moving away. One can see it moving to the left side of the uterus in an attempt, a pathetic attempt, to escape the inexorable instruments which the abortionist is using to extinguish its life. Now, the heart has again perceptibly speeded up. we can time this at approximately 200 beats per minute. And there is no question this child senses the most mortal danger imaginable. The membrane has now been punctured and the fluid has escaped. One no longer sees that large reservoir of fluid surrounding the child. But once the fluid has been drained off, the suction tip has now been firmly clamped to the child's body, and the child is being pulled in a downward direction by the abortionist's suction tip with the negative pressure applied to it, and the body is now being torn systematically from the head. The head of the child being in this direction here. I am now outlining the child's head. The lower extremities have already been lost, and we see the suction tip flashing from time to time in the screen as a typhoon-like series of echoes, and the child is being tugged back and forth as the suction tip has now been applied to the body and the abortionist is exerting his traction on the child in this manner. The child's head is still discernible here. The body is no longer discernible. It has now been torn from the head. What we see now is the head itself with what is called the midline echo of the head and the spicules or fragments of bone. Now this head, which I'm outlining here, on this 12-week child is simply too large to be pulled in one piece out of the uterus. The abortionist is going to have to employ this instrument, the polyp forceps, in an attempt to grab the head. The abortionist will attempt to crush the head with this instrument in this manner and remove the head piecemeal from the uterus. The abortionist and the anesthesiologist have a secret language between them which shields them from the grisly reality of what is going on. The abortionist and the anesthesiologist together refer to the head of this child, which is now being sought, as number one. And the anesthesiologist will inquire of the abortionist, is number one out yet? Are we finished? We now see intermittently the shanks or blades of this instrument appearing in the image here. The head tends to float freely in the uterus. Here are the shanks or blades of the instrument coming across here. And the head is now being locked on by this polyp forceps, and the head is being pulled down toward the cervix. Now all we see remaining are simply the shards, the broken fragments, the pieces of tissue which document that there was once a living, defenseless, tiny human being here. In considering the impact of abortion on our society, let's look at some figures as to what has actually happened in the last 20 years. We have reliable figures indicating that in 1963, long before abortion became legalized by the infamous Roe v. Wade decision, there were approximately 100,000 illegal abortions done annually in the United States, and very few legal abortions. In 1973, the first year in which that Roe v. Wade decision prevailed in this country, there were 750,000 abortions done. And in 1983, the last year for which we have full and complete figures, there were 1.5 million abortions. Now let's look at abortion as an industry. Last year, there were 1.5 million abortions done in this country. And the average cost of an abortion is about $300 to $400 per operation. This has created an industry in this country of about $500 to $600 million a year. which would qualify to be on the Fortune 500 list of largest industries in the world. 90% of these monies are going into the pockets of physicians, and the remainder into the pockets of the entrepreneurs who run the clinics. Now, we've had some recent investigations on the question of these clinics. Clinics are being franchised out like fast food services across the country. We know there are chains of them in California and through the Southwest and even in the Southeast of the United States. And there is some evidence now that increasingly these clinics are falling into the hands of the mob, of the crime syndicate here in the United States, and that this money, abortion money, is tainted not only by the blood of the innocent victims of abortion, but by the dark hand of the crime syndicate in the United States. When discussing abortion, we must also understand that the unborn child is not the only victim. Women themselves are victims just as the unborn children are. Women have not been told of the true nature of the unborn child. They have not been shown the true facts of what an abortion really is. Women in increasing numbers, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands, have had their wombs perforated, infected, destroyed. Women have been sterilized and castrated, all as a result of an operation of which they have had no true knowledge. This film, and other films which may follow like it, must be made a part of the informed consent for any woman before she submits herself to a procedure of this sort. I accuse the National Abortion Rights Action League, I accuse Planned Parenthood and all its co-conspirators in the abortion industry of a consistent conspiracy of silence, of keeping women in the dark with respect to the true nature of abortion. And I challenge all those purveyors of abortion to show this real-time videotape or one similar to it to all women before they consent to abortion. You know, I think I know a little bit about abortion. I was one of the founders of NARAL in 1969. It's now known as the National Abortion Rights Action League. And for a period of 2 years, I was the director of the largest abortion clinic in the Western world. Since those times, we have a science which is known as fetology, which has allowed us to study the human fetus. And all of those studies have concluded, without exception, that the unborn child is a human being, indistinguishable from any of us, and an integral part of our human community. Now, the destruction of a living human being is no solution to what is basically a social problem. I believe a resort to such violence is an admission of scientific, and even worse, ethical impoverishment. Somehow I refuse to believe that Americans, who have put men on the moon, can't devise a better solution than the resort to violence. I think we should all, here and now, devote ourselves to an untiring effort to devise a better solution, a solution compounded equally of love and compassion and a decent regard for the overriding priority of human life. Let's all, for humanity's sake, here and now, stop the killing.
risk. And I appreciate what he did for me in my campaign. I respect him and I wish him well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman touched on some controversial issues. The Contra issue was one he touched on. We could take a little poll right here, because Congress...
Try to... The reporting to priority list. Am I wrong on that or not?
I don't think it was necessarily that. I think Bush wanted him, which is why he's there. But there were questions about his background, and Senator Nunn revealed when he opened the hearings that, in fact, Tower was named before the background check was completed. There was an argument within the transition staff. There were people who were troubled about Tower's getting the nomination for the very reasons that have now come out.
We have the budget message on Thursday. Elizabeth, David, how strong is Bush right now? It is the honeymoon period. He's made all these gestures, symbolic acts, which are very important in getting an administration off the ground and running. But now the real game begins.
He's strengthened himself considerably in Washington by the behavior and actions he's taken, particularly in the outreach to Congress during this transition period in the first 2 weeks of the administration. I think he's probably somewhat stronger in the country. But government now begins on the night of the 9th. We've had a lot of sort of theatrics up to this point. It's been helpful to him, and he is somewhat stronger than he was on election night.
But Elizabeth, I will just throw this out as an idea, perhaps devil's advocate, and that is the fact that when the hardball really begins up there, Bush is going to have a problem because he won't be able to go to the nation the way Ronald Reagan could. He's created this climate of goodwill, but that somewhere down the line, that's not going to be enough. He's going to have to cut a deal with Congress, and that may include, or probably will at some point, include some kind of taxes, whatever you want to call them.
Well, of course, in the end, Ronald Reagan had to cut many deals with Congress as well, but I think you make a very good point, which is that Bush does not have, the public following that Reagan had coming in. I'm trying to stay away from the word mandate, but it does have to do with something like that. And it's not clear to me that members of Congress will fear him the way they feared Reagan because of his ability to go over their heads to the public. But I think Bush is going to stay very firm on this no taxes, perhaps for the entire year, but I don't see how he can do it throughout his entire term as president.
It's a very different kind of government that we're looking at now. The voters send a mandate. They send a mandate by re-electing a Democratic Congress and strengthening the Democrats in Congress that the only way anything will be done is by negotiation and conciliation. Bush has acknowledged that is the mandate from the voters, and I think there is a good reciprocal readiness on the part of many of the Democratic leaders in the Capitol to work with him.
David Broder, Elizabeth Drew, thank you for being with me this morning on Meet the Press. The fact that the Tower nomination and the pay raise for Congress have attracted so much attention these past weeks and generated so much heat is partly due to the fact, as Alan Simpson noted, that they've occurred at a moment when there are no other dominant issues diverting public attention. So neither the Congress nor the President can avoid those ethical questions each professes to care about. On Thursday, however, the President will present his budget plan to the Congress. Their honeymoon will soon end, and it's quite possible that the ethical questions Mr. Bush has articulated and the public is clearly concerned about could be lost in the din of the budget battle and in the quicksand of what is known as politics as usual. That would be too bad. Ethics in government are not just this week's or this month's story. I'm Garrett Utley. I hope you'll join me this evening for NBC Nightly News and again next week for Sunday Today and Meet the Press.
Every second of every day, there are 3 new mouths in this world to feed. Hundreds of millions more by the year 2000. And the majority of them will be born in countries where malnutrition is already reaching alarming proportions. Right now, the world has the food and the resources to conquer hunger. But it won't happen as long as we continue to look the other way.
Anywhere in the world you can dial direct.
London Market is closing.
You can dial with MCI.
How is the Nikkei Dow?
You can dial with unsurpassed call quality.
The dollar's strong and holding.
And you can save up to 22% on international calls versus AT&T.
Get me our office in Frankfurt.
MCI Worldwide Direct Dialing. Now there's no reason in the world to dial with anyone else.
All right, let's buy.
Until you call, you'll never know how much better a long-distance company can be. MCI. Let us show you.
Meet the Press
was sponsored by ADM, Supermarket to the World, and MCI. Until you call, you'll never know how much better a long-distance company can be. For a printed transcript of Meet the Press, send $1 and a stamped self-addressed envelope to Kelly Press, Box 12160, Silver Spring, Maryland, 20908.
Tomorrow, a Spotlight report. Each year, over 250 people die because of police chases. Is the price of hot pursuit too high? On NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. Find out where your tax dollars are headed as Tom Brokaw brings you President Bush's first address to Congress and America. Live from
the last great Cadillac dealer. Service, courtesy, respect. Rennick Cadillac, Fullerton, 91 Freeway, north on Euclid.
Anyway, I was there for, 5 years? Mm-hmm. I hate to raid these guys, but I bet I could get Jensen and Cimino over here.
What do you think it would take?
We can beat their salaries, but we can't match their benefits. They had a great dental plan. Well, that's what I miss.
You miss your dental plan?
Oh, yeah. They saved us serious money. The outfit we got it from, they offered a whole range of plans.
Tell you what, you work on Jensen and Cimino, or I'll see about getting their dental plan.
I call in to check on my parts order, right? They say that file is in the big computer. We don't have access to that. We don't have a copy of your P.O. He's on a different computer system.
Excuse me.
Sorry. Did you send a copy to the field rep? This isn't the number you called. I can't access your credit line. Blah, blah, blah. There's no such thing as service anymore.
You ought to change to my supplier.
What do they do right?
I don't know, but it works.
How can we stop campus rape? Starting Tuesday on the Channel 4 News at 11.
From the nation's capital, the McLaughlin Group, an unrehearsed program presenting inside opinions and forecasts on major issues of the day. Sponsored by GE. GE makes products that make life easier and better. At GE, we bring good things to life. Here's the moderator, John McLaughlin, Washington editor of the National Review.
Issue 1. Go ahead. Raise my pay. Next Wednesday, February 8th, is D-Day for the 50% pay raise for members of Congress. It goes into effect automatically unless both houses of Congress put it to a vote and both houses vote to kill it. Thursday, the Senate did vote no on the raise. The House, however, is handling it differently.
Well, the House will vote next week to ban all honorariums and to cut the pay raise to 30% instead of 50%. That'll make it just come out even.
The yes vote on the Speaker's resolution is not a vote to cut your salary 20%. It's a vote to increase it 30%.
Here's what's at stake. Senators and representatives get a pay jump from $89,500 to $135,000. The Vice President, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the Speaker of the House, the embattled Jim Wright, that is, $115,000 to $175,000. Cabinet members, $99,500 to $155,000. Total add-on cost to the taxpayer, $300 million annually. The pay raise would also substantially increase congressional pensions, which currently average $40,000 annually for retired senators and congressmen. Existing perks for the Congress remain untouched. Free medical, free dental, free travel, free taxis, free meals, free banking, free telephone, free mailing, free parking, free gymnasium, free pool. Pat Buchanan, please describe for us the current state of affairs legislatively with regard to this pay raise.
All right, what happened, John, is the country is outraged by this pay raise all over the nation.
Is it a firestorm?
And it's a firestorm, and they want a vote. So Jim Wright, under this terrible heat, decided to spread it around by conducting this poll of all the members of Congress. So they sent back answers to him, lying their heads off, saying, they told the truth to Wright. Yes, we do want the pay raise, and no, we don't want to vote. And then when the press went to Congress, they said, no, we don't want a pay raise, and yes, we do want to vote. So in addition to this piece of larceny going down, there is dissembling and lying. John, I can't think of anything in the last 20 years which has done more to discredit the institution of the Congress of the United States than this pay raise.
Fred Barnes.
Well, I can think of a few things that have, but there are a number of reasons this whole thing is in a lot of trouble. One, the timing is bad. We have the deficit. We don't have a Bush agenda out there, so there's nothing. There's no big competing news story. And this method that Jim Wright has concocted, where you vote either for a 30% raise or a 50% raise, and the only way you can get rid of the honoraria is by voting for the 30% raise. It's just too cute. And the problem for Wright is he's lost control of the situation, and no telling what will happen after the honoraria, after the pay raise goes into effect, which it will next Wednesday.
You agree with that, Jack? You think that Wright has bungled this?
Yeah, I do. I think Wright, and I think all of them, with a few exceptions, underestimated the intensity and the volatility of public opinion on the issue. I think they're entitled to a pay raise, not 50% necessarily, but a pay raise. But the method that they're using, and this new trickiness, is something that just will not go down with people. If they're going to do it, they're going to have to vote for them.
The polling is 9-1 against the pay raise, and the volume of mail is enormous. What do you have to say, Mark?
I see that you've shifted along with the tide of public opinion on this issue, that you're now militantly against it with all that, the perks business and all that. Look,
what do you mean shifted?
You weren't in favor of the pay raise in the beginning.
No, I never endorsed the pay raise.
Well, you certainly weren't as militantly. You weren't part of the Buchanan Brigade. The Buchanan Ralph Nader Brigade.
I objectively displayed the factual data on the screen, which you want to hide.
Just a second.
You want to sweep it under the rug. No one sees it and goes through.
These guys have not kept up with inflation. They have two houses, how often that they have to maintain, one back in the district, one here. Just a second now. The commission...
He's playing a violin over there. He's going like this.
The commission that devised this pay raise, a lot of the members of the commission thought that they would recommend this 50% raise. Then the President Reagan, your great conservative hero, would knock it down to something like the 30% that Wright is now proposing, and it would go through.
And he outfoxed
them. Reagan outfoxed them. That's not what they expected. Just a second. Some of them did.
Quickly.
Reagan gave him the whole thing, and instead of him taking the heat, or George Bush taking the heat, the Democrats in Congress are largely taking the heat, and the Republicans are doing it. Just one last point. Quickly. 30% is fair. Now, come on, a 30% pay raise with no honorarium is basically a level surface.
That brings it up to $116,000 a year.
I think that the 30% pay raise right now, when you're asking people to stay at the minimum wage and military retirees, no pension increase at all, is outrageous. George Bush,
what do you mean?
made a terrible mistake in this. He had a golden opportunity to lead the entire country on this thing, and he failed to do so.
Let's get into that a little bit. By the way, last week the pay raise gained the endorsement of an important person, the President of the United States.
I did say I supported it, and I do support it. A raise is overdue. There's no question about that.
Why did Bush support this pay raise in the light of the overwhelming negative public polling and the overwhelming negative mails? What do you say about it, Mort?
I think he may have had a double strategy here. One, he gets to keep good relations with the bipartisan spirit and all that stuff. With Congress,
buy them off,
not pick a fight on an issue. But he has public opinion working against the Democrats in Congress, and they're at a disadvantage.
Jack, what about this as far as Bush is concerned?
Well, for Bush, it's a freebie. Reagan has already done this. Bush goes along with it. And the other thing is Bush doesn't want to pull their legs out from under the people he's going to have to deal with on the Hill over the next couple of years. Let me make another point about this. One of the interesting things to me is this business of Wright going and polling the members. Because it strikes me that is a real abdication of leadership. If I cannot imagine Lyndon Johnson or Tip O'Neill, for that matter, polling the membership. If you're going to do this thing, you have to brazen it out.
Let me first of all clarify to the audience, this is what Wright's proposing, that the pay raise go into effect at 50% automatically next Wednesday, and the following day or thereabouts Thursday, they vote to cut it to 30%. The problem with that is that the bill has to pass through the process, so that could take several months. He doesn't know how the Senate's going to vote. He doesn't know whether he can live up to the expectation
You're talking beltway talk. And the problem with what Mr. Bush is doing is he had a golden opportunity
to be the leader of the country and say, look, no pay raises till we deal with the deficit, and besides, I'd like a 10% pay cut. He'd be a national hero. Instead, he's playing this inside Rockefeller.
Let me say something on that. Let me say something. This argument about the deficit is a phony. We're talking about $300 million with all through the levels of the bureaucracy and all.
You are not.
We're talking about less than half the cost.
The government
less than half the cost of $1
billion when it goes through the bureaucracy. Hey, look, and the civil service, what's going to happen? It's going to go through the bureaucracy and the civil service. It always does.
John, let me tell you what actually happened at the White House when the issue was brought to Bush and brought to his aides. Darman was all for it, the budget director. Brady,
in favor of the raise.
In favor of the full raise. Brady, the Treasury Secretary, was all for it. The only guy who, and so was Boyden Gray, the legal counsel, the only guy that raised any doubts about it, well, there were two people who did.
Sununu?
One was Sununu, and the other was Bush himself, who wondered about the politics of getting the one through. He was all for it for judges. He was all for it for judges, but he worried about getting it through for members of Congress and senior officials. He held off for a long time. Everybody had expected him to announce his support in a speech earlier, but he held off until the last minute.
Will the 50% raise go through automatically next Wednesday, yes or no?
Sure it will, but there's going to be later votes to repeal it.
It will.
Jack? Yeah, I agree with Pat, and there'll be a rollback vote.
Mort?
And we'll end up with 30%, which is just about where we should be, and the judges will get the full 50%.
Answer, you are all correct. We'll be right back.
To all you students of innovation, to you inspired to try what's never been tried before, to all those consumed with an insatiable curiosity, a penchant for ingenuity, to you who seek and search and blaze new trails, who try and fail and try again, to all you children of imagination, you sons and daughters and mothers of invention, dreamers and doers, thinkers and tinkerers all, we at General Electric salute you. For as advanced as our technology has become, we've never forgotten that from small beginnings, big ideas grow.
Dear Mom, we're sorry we can't be there with you and the family, but we're sending you some things which
She gave you everything you'd ever need to chase your dreams and make them real. She gave you love to last a while, and now you're giving back the smile.
And Mom, we send them with all our love.
Was always there. So gather round and celebrate all the good things in life. We bring good things to life.
Issue 2, out of Afghanistan. After 10 years of occupation, the Soviet Union is pulling out of Afghanistan to meet an agreed-upon February 15th deadline. The exit appears to be ahead of schedule. But the U.S. State Department charged this week that the withdrawing Soviets have adopted a scorched earth policy, widespread and intensive bombing that has killed hundreds of civilians and mujahideen rebels. But the bloodshed won't end when the Soviets are gone. The civilian government in Afghanistan, Soviet-backed and headed by Mohammad Najibullah, will face bitter and bloody opposition from these rebel groups.
I think the perception is that the current government, current order in Kabul is collapsing and deteriorating, that the regime in many senses now is like a building without its girders, and there's a sense that we expect greater disorder in the future.
I'd like to ask you this question, Fred Barnes. Where does Afghanistan go from here?
Well, I'll tell you where it goes. First, there's Najibullah government. Najibullah will hold on about as well as Dien Bien Phu did, only not as long. I mean, Kabul's going to fall. The fact is this government has no support, and unless the Soviets continue bombing all over Afghanistan, which they're quite capable of doing, but now from planes taking off from inside the Soviet Union, and of course they've said they're not going to do that, that government is going to fall. And then what you wind up with is you do have some discordant factions of the Afghan rebels, and they'll kind of squabble with each other, set up a weak central government. But the important thing is that the Reagan doctrine worked. Roll back communism.
Jack, the revealing thing is the efforts the Soviets are making to try to talk coalition, to try to make agreements, which tells me they expect that government to be gone in about 3 days, which is probably right.
If there is slaughter in Afghanistan, what's the political impact on Gorbachev? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think I can, John. I think there is going to be slaughter. There's going to be a massacre, and it's not simply communists that are going to be killed. It's going to be like Indonesia in 1965. I think the slaughter, especially if it's televised and there's a lot of pictures coming out of there, the impact upon the Soviet Union, which is the empire that never retreats, is going to be disastrous. It'll be worse than the United States in Vietnam because we have the resiliency to recover from a defeat like that.
Yelena Bonner, the wife of Andrei Sakharov, says there's not much chance that Gorby's going to make it. We're reading and hearing more and more about Gorby's chances of making it getting slimmer and slimmer. You've read this? You know about it? Can you speak to that?
Well, Gorbachev, in the light of the source, I don't think it helps Gorbachev at all. I mean, this is another prop knocked out from under Russian pride. I mean, they're now confessing all around the place that the system doesn't work, and it sounds as though Gorbachev is the leader of the band of people who are naysaying in the Soviet Union in a major way, that they're attacking Leninism. Now they've suffered a military defeat. Gorbachev's responsible for it. It certainly weakens him politically.
John, there's not necessarily going to be a slaughter there if Najibullah and the 20 or 30,000 people that are a part of his regime leave with the Soviets, leave by the helicopters from the...
Gorbachev's salary is only $28,000 a year. If he does fall, he can come to the United States and run for Congress.
He has a lot of perks. He could get on one-on-one, John. John, let me mention one thing. These Soviets leaving, they are poisoning the wells, poisoning the food supply, and leaving millions of these toy mines all over that country, which are going to be blowing little kids up 20 years from now. It is just an act of insanity what they're doing as they get out.
Exit question. When will the civilian government of Najibullah in Afghanistan fall? One-word answer.
I give it about 6 weeks.
6 weeks. April 1.
Let me check my watch. About 6 hours after the Soviets pulled out.
Really? 6 hours?
So they can get into Kabul in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, no more than 3 weeks.
6 days?
No, not 6 days, but 3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
A month.
A month. April 1 is the answer. Issue 3, political potpourri. You're right, Pat. Item, faulty tower. John Tower, George Bush's defense secretary designate, faced more accusations during his Senate confirmation hearings this week.
I have encountered the nominee in a condition, lack of sobriety, as well as with women to whom he was not married.
Behind closed doors, Wyrick's charges largely failed to stand up to scrutiny. But by week's end, the Senate committee put off a confirmation vote on Tower so that more background checks could be done on fresh information on his personal life. How serious is this setback for the ethics thing of George Bush? I ask you, Jack Jamon.
Well, first of all, we don't know what these new allegations are, or whether they've been substantiated. I'm sort of puzzled about a couple of things. I mean, we're applying this character issue test to Tower, which I've never seen done with cabinet members before, and it might very well have been applied to some of them. John Tower has just been an arms negotiator. He was head of the Iran-Contra Commission. He was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee before that. And I wonder what is so different about these that makes it impossible for him to... Wait a minute, let me finish my point. And the second thing is, I am particularly interested in this, and particularly puzzled by this, in view of the fact that they really glossed over a careful examination of all the money he made in his relationship with the defense contractors, which I think is a very serious thing.
About $1 million, by the way.
They did not gloss over that, but here's the problem with...
Well, your definition of glossing over, since you want to see John Tower in that place...
No, quickly. Au contraire. Look, the problem here is that it was a question in these latest allegations they're checking out, where it's a question of what he did while the arms negotiator in Geneva, what he did as a representative of the United States, what his conduct was, whether he was drunk, whether he was womanizing. That's what they're checking out. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's what they're checking out. So it's not just idle ramblings into his character.
The latest round of this thing is an unconfirmed report, which with a very weak source, as I understand it, to the FBI or to the committee, that he was involved with a Russian ballerina whom he bought a house for in Houston. Now, it looks like it's an empty story, right?
That's not the only thing they're looking into.
It's not the only thing.
Assuming that John Tower does not make it, who will be nominated by George Bush as the next Secretary of Defense? Pat?
I don't think Tower's dead yet, but if he were, I would think that Bush would move quickly to someone easily confirmable like Jim Schlesinger or Don Rumsfeld.
I think Tower will make it, but I think Rumsfeld would be a great Secretary of Defense.
Yeah, Don Rumsfeld would never have a ballerina in Houston.
You saying Rumsfeld?
That'd be my guess here.
Rumsfeld.
I'll say Rumsfeld. Final question, exit question number 2. Will Tower make it?
I still think he will.
Fred?
I think it's strongly likely that he will.
Jack?
Yeah, I think he will.
Mort?
I think he won't.
Mort? I think it's too close to call. Item, don't forget to pack a lunch.
This is the first presidential envoy of President Bush's administration. I am here to represent him, to applaud and to be a real cheerleader for democracy.
On his first foreign mission this week, Vice President Dan Quayle attended the inauguration of Venezuela's President Carlos Andres Perez. Afterwards, Quayle stopped in El Salvador, where he met with leaders of 2 of the country's major political parties, and he gave a human rights address, Pat. Assign a grade, if you would, to Quayle on his first diplomatic mission. I call on you, Fred Barnes. You had breakfast one time with Quayle, I believe.
I did once, and I think he's gotten an A. The fact is, his political rehabilitation has begun. It actually began shortly after he came into office when someone wrote of him that he's intelligent, well-informed, candid, energetic. Take a bow, Mort. Go ahead.
Did you write that about Quayle?
I did.
Why did you do that?
Because I found him exactly.
What do you mean you found him? Where did you find him?
I found him. I met him at a dinner party.
At a dinner party where?
At your house.
Now,
can we get out of the inside?
Quickly.
Look. This is a man who needs to grow and is growing.
Exactly.
I mean, he was at one time a golf team frat boy. He decided that he was going to grow up. He became a serious senator, and I think he's going to be a serious vice president.
Why don't we wait till we see a little more? This was not really a diplomatic mission. He went down there for an inauguration. He went to El Salvador and made his speech. He shot up his mouth a little bit about Carter in a way that wasn't very seemly. Why don't we just...
But Carter, who wasn't very seemly, Carter was up to Danny Ortega. You like that?
Carter was invited down there by the new president of Venezuela.
But they were
old friends.
He wasn't invited to go get chummy with Daniel Ortega.
But we all agree that the rehabilitation has begun. Item, Ron, DNC. Ron Brown, Washington lawyer, former advisor to Jesse Jackson, staffer to Ted Kennedy, will be the next chairman of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. All other contenders dropped out. What does Brown's chairmanship signal for and about the Democratic Party, Jack Jamond?
Well, not a great deal. The fact is that if Ron Brown had been white, he would have won that thing going away weeks ago. It wouldn't even have been a contest. Most of the Southern Party people are still grousing and muttering to themselves, which is a serious mistake. In fact, they're going to find that Brown is a very capable guy, and they're also going to find that even people who don't like the relationship between the Democratic Party and blacks and the reliance on blacks in the South are not going to hold the fact that there was a black chairman against the Democratic Party in any practical way.
If Ron Brown were white, he'd probably be a Republican. but the fact is he's not going to be the chief spokesman for the Democratic Party. That's going to be George Mitchell, who's the Senate Majority Leader.
You know,
now.
I agree with Jack. I think they've exaggerated the terrible problem Brown's going to be. I don't think he's going to be a serious problem because he's not going to be a spokesman, not going to be the policymaker, but he will be this. He's important in that committee, and I think that helps Jesse Jackson in terms of 92 with regard to party rules for nomination, and there I think he can be influential.
Yeah, everything depends on how he handles Jesse Jackson. If he stands up to Jesse Jackson and makes it clear, as Paul Kirk did with Teddy Kennedy, that he is an objective person, which I think he will do, then I think it could be a very big plus for Ron Brown.
Quickly, Jack.
Well, I mean, the notion that Ron Brown is Jesse Jackson's guy is only bandied about by those who don't know Ron Brown. He is not anybody's guy. That's nonsense.
Item, travels without Charlie. England's Princess Diana swept through New York City this week, absent her spouse, Prince Charles, the future King Charles III. Speculation raged that the princess's travels without the prince and his upcoming travels here without her signal terminal marital strife. Why does the press apply a double standard to these two attractive public figures? Other political couples of their standing travel overseas alone to public functions without being so hassled and harassed. Pat, you're a monarchist.
Very closely.
What do you think?
Lady Di is what they call in England a Sloane Ranger. She's down at Sloane's department store, whatever it is, all the time. And there has been some trouble between the two of them, but it's the British tabloid press that loves this stuff and has been feeding on it for years and years and years. And she came to New York. She's doing just fine.
How could we make wisecracks about the British tabloid press when we are talking about that in this program? Which is absolutely ridiculous.
No, I'm addressing the question of media ethics here. What do you say?
Well, welcome everyone to tabloid television.
What do you say?
I'm not participating in this.
Well, what's the exit question then, Pat?
They're going to stay together forever. And
They are?
Yeah, the last Charlie was beheaded, wasn't he?
What do you say?
I don't think she's going to divorce him for you, John.
What do you say?
I have not the foggiest
What do you
idea.
say?
Together forever.
Together forever, but a private arrangement. We'll be right back.
We are the spark in the engine, the switch in the night, a voice in the dark from a million miles away. We are the thieves and the flash, the glitz and the flash. We are me. We are the good things you hear and see. We are me. We are the sound of eternal and the whisper in the sky. We are me. That's what we'll always be. We bring the things to life. G.E. is life.
These eyes will read some 14,000 newspapers, 6,000 magazines, and 1,000 books in a lifetime. And sadly, most of us read in insufficient light. That's why GE developed the soft white reader light to provide a soft yet brighter light that makes reading easier. The soft white reader light from GE.
G.E. is life. We bring good things to life.
All our science, all our technology, all our mathematics, our computations. Somehow they all add up to moments that are beyond any calculation.
Predictions, Pat Buchanan.
John, contrary to a report we had on this program several months ago, Yugoslavia is in a hellish mess right now. The Communist Party is in something of a crisis. The military is threatening to intervene. I predict it'll be the first country that really has some kind of internal explosion.
Really? Well, it's interesting but erroneous. What do you have to say?
I remember that report. Who gave that report, Pat? That wasn't John, was it?
Quickly.
Look, the best idea the Israelis have had in a long time, which is to put Natan Sharansky as their UN ambassador is not a shoo-in because the Labor Party is worried that it'll make the Soviets mad, and getting together with the Soviets is what the Labor Party really has said is its centerpiece.
Jack Jamon.
From various indicators, including Tower's testimony, it now appears that the administration is going to cut back probably quite sharply on SDI funding in its new budget.
More.
After the bloodbath in Afghanistan, you will find Mujahideen factions at each other's throats, assisted by the Soviet Union trying to stir things up by furnishing arms to one faction or another.
Is Bernie Aronson's nomination in trouble?
No.
Confirmation?
No.
No?
No.
My exit prediction is that at the G7 meeting this week, not very much will be done to lower the value of the dollar. It will remain just about where it is, and maybe climb by a kind of soft gradualism, because Brady does not have the clout of Baker. Next week, President Bush delivers his budget to Congress. Bye-bye.
The McLaughlin Group has been sponsored by GE. GE makes products that make life easier and better. At GE, we bring good things to life. For a transcript, send $4 to Federal News Service, 620 National Press Building, Washington, D.C., 20045. Specify program date. Topics are selected by Mr. McLaughlin, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the participants.